Welcome all of you. Continuing with ISO 14001 standard. So, today's lecture will cover ISO 14001 components and clauses, followed by a case study on Tata Steel. So, we will look at like what was the initial status of this company before they applied for ISO 14001 standard, how they approached applying for this particular standard, and once they apply for it and got certification, what was the impact on the company's status. So, components of ISO 14001, as it is the most widely used environmental management system and it is based on PDCA cycle, Plan Do Check Act, and like any other environmental management system, its emphasis is on the continuous improvement. So, if we start it with the environmental policy, which is mostly framed by the top level management, and that policy sets the direction where company wish to go in future so far as environmental performance is concerned, and it is aligned with the vision and mission of the company, and it sets a like I said, direction. So, to achieve that vision, there is a need for planning, which will consider different aspects, compliance, objectives and targets, and environmental management programs. So, each of these terminologies, I think we have covered it already when we studied about EMS, like what is aspect, what is objective, target. Okay. So, in planning stages, all those things are taken into account, and further plan of action is also considered in this stage. In implementation, you form a team and assign the roles and responsibilities to different members of the team, and because most often it is the team with new members, there is a need for training and communication. There is EMS document control and emergency preparedness and response, it is prepared in the implementation stage. So, whatever is planned in the planning stage, when it is executed in the implementation stage, it is like performing action, but here in the PDCA cycle we call it as like say check. So, to check something we have to do something first, right. Like for example, let me give you a simple example of if you want to check the tire pressure in a car tire, first we will have to put that gas meter with the measuring meter on the knob of the tube, and then it will help us to measure the tire pressure, and based on the value then we would see whether there is a need for any checking or corrective action. If the tire pressure is low, we will command or we will put more air in it. If it is high, we will release some air out of the tire, right. So, after implementation stage, when we do the checking and corrective action, it involves lot of measuring and monitoring. So, you do the measurements for like say air emission, water wastage, water discharge, the amount of solid waste that is generated from the company. So, all those measurements, and they are continuously monitored, and then EMS non-conformance and corrective actions. So, if it is in compliance or if it is aligning with the goals set by the EMS, then it is fine. If it is not, then there is a need for some corrective action, and whatever are these measurements and monitoring, we need to keep record of it. So, those records and the audit record is also kept in this stage, and now these corrective actions or checking would be reviewed by the management, and decisions will be taken whether the existing policy, planning, implementation framework is proper or it needs some modification, and that is what is the drive for continuous improvement. So, these are the components of ISO 14001, and now let us come to the clauses of ISO 14001. So, previously we saw like at the beginning what is ISO 14001, what were the key elements, what are the benefits. Now, just now we saw what are the components, like how does the entire framework look like with leadership in the center driving for continuous improvement. Now, looking at the clauses, so there are 10 clauses. So, clause is basically a main numbered section in any standard. So, standard ISO 14001. So, it will be published like a small booklet which has lot of things in it, and each section would be numbered, and that section number is called as a clause. So, there are 10 clauses in ISO 14001, and first 3 clauses they just provide a background to the standard, like what that standard is related to. So, it includes the scope, the references, and the terms and definitions of different terminologies. And clause 4 to clause 10, they are common to most of the management systems like environmental safety, quality and occupational health and safety. So, these are the different standards, but they are similar to that because they are concerning with the context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation and improvement. So, if you visualize the previous graph or the figure that I showed you, so it is similar. So, all those terminologies you can see it in this component based framework of ISO 14001. So, the clauses 4 to 10 they deal with that with respect to the context of the organization. So, these 10 clauses sets all the or provide all the information required for achieving or like applying for ISO 14001 and what does that standard actually mean. So, now coming to the case study of Tata Steel. So, Tata Steel it's one of the big companies in India established like more than 100 years back in 1907. This is a typical like steel plant which produces or processes crude steel, and the primary operations involved in any steel plant is the manufacturing of steel, mining, and then there is a downstream processing to further convert that crude steel into finished products like say stainless steel or some alloys. So, in India itself they have 12 manufacturing facilities and produce around 12 plus million tons of crude steel per annum. It is a global company because they have some units outside India also. So, if you look at the workforce globally they have 65,000 employees and in India they have more than 15,000 employees, and in market it is the second biggest steel producer in India. So, with this background of Tata Steel, now since you got to know that it is a hard to abate sector, there is a commonly used term nowadays called as hard to abate sector. So, like India has set the net zero goal of 2070 and hard to abate sectors are those sectors of industries where it is very difficult to reduce CO2 emissions or global warming impact beyond a certain point. Okay. So, there are many industries like the steel, chemical, fertilizer, power sector. So, power sector and all it is easy to reduce the CO2 emissions because if we reduce let us say coal and co-fire it with biomass, it will reduce the environmental impact. If we go on adding renewable installations like say solar and wind facilities, again it will help to reduce emissions of the power sector. But in the sectors like steel, cement, iron, mines, these are hard to abate sectors because these are the highly energy intensive operations where you have to extract material from the core of the earth and it is going to consume a lot of energy and going to have a lot of environmental impact. So, this was a very best example to take as a case study so far as ISO 14001 certification is concerned. So, with this background like since it Tata Steel is involved in the manufacturing of steel and it has several operations. So, they had several environmental challenges. It has very high energy consumption and resource utilization. Look at the magnitude like 12 million tons of steel production per annum. So, the material and energy that would go into that plant would be of the similar magnitude. So, it has very high energy consumption, high resource utilization, high water usage for cooling and other processing because the blast furnaces which are used in the steel industry, they operate at temperatures more than 1000 degrees Celsius, right, 1200 to 1400 to 2000 degrees Celsius depending on what fuel we use. So, the gases coming out of it or the solid product coming out of it needs cooling and further processing which involves high usage of water. And then there is a generation of several waste streams like slag, dust, sludge. Slag would come out from the blast furnace, the molten part of the ash or the molten part of the fuel like coal or coke which is used. Then dust, there would be a lot of fine particulates and dust coming out of coal and coke burning as well as the inorganic content of the starting material for obtaining crude steel, and the sludge where water is used for cooling and washing and cleaning. There would be a lot of solid particles which would be entrained in water coming out in the form of sludge. Then there will be a lot of air pollution including particulate matter and greenhouse gases because of high energy usage and consumption of fossil fuels. And land use and soil contamination. Because it involves some mining, there will be soil contamination, and the plant capacities are huge, the machineries are huge, so the land use is also very high. So, almost every component of the environment, you can see air, water, soil are being impacted by this steel industry. So, for every ton of steel, almost 1.83 tons of CO2 is released. And if I have to like list down, as I told you, every component of environment is affected by steel production. You see there are air emissions, soil and water contamination. There would be noise and vibration because of heavy machineries continuously in operation. There will be a lot of solid waste generation, waste water, and then metal working fluids. So, it is again the waste fluid which needs to be disposed of very technically and in a safe manner. So, with these environmental challenges, there were some other challenges also which Tata Steel was facing before implementing ISO 14001, and some of them actually all these challenges are listed in the 3 categories like compliance, environment and social or stakeholder based. So, under compliance or regulatory issues, the challenge was because they have 12 facilities in different parts of the country. So, there are multiple jurisdictions and there are different states would have different regulations. Also, central government regulations would be different from a particular state government regulation. So, since there are different plants located in different locations, even though it's the owner is same, they need to ensure that they follow the jurisdiction like the compliances in the specific jurisdiction. Then the evolving standards, with environmental concerns coming or taking a prime stage at the global platform, the standards have been evolving and we need to keep pace or match those increasingly environmental norms, because earlier the emission limits were little relaxed, but now they are becoming more stringent and stricter. Then documentation gaps, with most of these plants like more than 100-year old, and that time the data collection and reporting would be in a different way than what it is done at present using AI and data softwares and all. So, there is a possibility that some of the plants may not have all the documentations required for say policy formulation or corrective actions that would be required for like taking with respect to environmental protection. So, those documentation gaps, and then audit findings. So, audit is done every year and there are some recurring issues which are identified during regulatory inspections, those need to be addressed. So, these are different types of compliance issues, and second one is operational inefficiencies, because it needs a lot of energy, water and raw material. So, if they are used in excess, there is a wastage of resources, but how would you know whether it is excess utilized or underutilized? So, for that analysis needs to be done, but it was observed that there was excess utilization, there was limited recycling and reuse of waste which was generated, because most of the waste which comes out of industry like steel or iron, it has very high market value, like the many minerals, materials, solids can be actually recovered, recycled, and they can serve as a starting material for some other company. And process variations would lead to inconsistent performance, and then there is technology gaps were there because of outdated monitoring and control remedies. So, there is a need for advancement in technology. So, those are all the factors which contribute to operational inefficiencies. Third was stakeholder pressure. So, like I said, environmental protection or environmental performance is a well known social concern also. So, there are community concerns. It may be related to the community living inside the steel plant or the community living in the close areas of the steel plant facility. Then there are investors' expectations with growing ESG, that is environmental social governance requirement. Many people who want to invest in the companies, they want this ESG compliance. Then there will be demand from customers and regulatory scrutiny. So, all these things were there at Tata Steel before ISO 14001 certification. So, it impacted the business in different ways. For example, because things were not utilized properly, there was wastage, there were emissions. So, there were breakage of compliance laws and regulations. So, it increased the cost and penalty fines. The resource inefficiency led to higher operational cost. For example, if you are over utilizing or there is a wastage of material, it would lead to higher cost. and that would reduce the profit ultimately. The reputation challenges and risk. If there are environmental emissions, if there is a lot of smoke coming out of the chimney, that would lead to concerns amongst the community living nearby, and it may challenge the reputation of the company. Then limited access to environmentally conscious markets. So, from a steel plant, there are several finished products which are also coming into the market, and if like environmentally conscious market, like if there is someone else producing the similar kind of steel based product or a stainless steel based product in a more eco-friendlier way, then maybe these products won't make it to some of the markets which specify that okay, for your steel, if this is the limit for CO2 emission, like I showed you previously, 1.83 tons CO2 per ton of steel. So, if the limit is set to 1.6, so then these products having more than 1.6 ton CO2 emissions will not qualify for those market. Then there is a moral issues for employee and stakeholders due to increasing environmental concerns. So, now with this background, what did Tata Steel decide to do? They wanted to go for ISO 14001 implementation, and the objectives with which they decided to move forward was, first of all, to achieve full compliance with all the environmental regulations, then to optimize resource utilization and minimize waste, then to identify and mitigate environmental risk proactively. Proactively means you try to predict based on the environmental aspects what impact it is going to have on environment, and then accordingly take a measure to reduce that impact. So, that is a proactive approach. Demonstrate environmental commitment to all stakeholders, like if they get this certification, it will send a message to all the stakeholders, and it will also strengthen their position as an industry leader in the sustainable manufacturing. So, with these objectives, they set on a journey to implement ISO 14001, and the framework, they divided it into 4 phases and set the 1.5 year timeline, where in first 4 months they would be doing environmental assessment and gap analysis. In next 4 months they did strategic planning and system design. Next 4 to 5 months they did system implementation and training, and last 4 months they did monitoring, auditing and certification. So, this is a time based like division of work, but what were actually those 4 phases which were decided by Tata Steel? The first phase was environmental assessment, where detailed assessment of aspects and impacts associated with environment will taken were noted or measured, like air emissions, water, waste, energy consumption, noise, vibration. So, all these things were accounted for phase 1. Phase 2 was strategic planning, like how to develop new policy in such a way that following objectives are attained. So, what are the objectives? Reduce CO2 emissions by 15 to 25% within 3 years. So, when this specific values are mentioned with the objective, it is basically a targeted objective, right, with specified time frame. Then achieve 95% water recycling, because it needs lot of water for cooling purpose. Whenever you use water for cooling, it is not like getting polluted or contaminated. The only thing is like its temperature gets like a little higher. So, if you cool it like there is a potential of reusing that water for some other purposes when it comes down to room temperature. So, 85% waste recycling and reuse. Like I said, most of the waste is inorganic ash based minerals, metals, which can be easily recycled or reused. Then improve the energy efficiency by 20%. This can be done by upgrading to like say more energy efficient equipment and devices, and having or closing the energy wastage streams and reusing the wastage heat of exhaust gases or exhaust streams. So, that way energy efficiency can be increased by almost 20%, and then 100% compliance with all the environmental regulations. So, that was phase 2. In phase 3 they did implementation. So, for implementation you need a proper team. Tata Steel made certain changes in their organizational structure. They appointed a chief sustainability officer who would be looking after overall environmental performance. Then there was a EMS steering committee which will do the strategic oversight and allocate the resources associated with environmental management. Then there are facility environmental managers. So, there are 12 facilities. So, for each facility there was one environmental manager for site level implementation. Then environmental coordinators. each site will have different sections or departments. So, for departmental work there were environmental coordinators, and for engaging employees to contribute towards environmental performance or environmental policy of the company and create awareness, there were some people who were termed as the green champions. So, that was the overall organizational structure which was decided before implementing the system. And at the implementation stage, the key processes included those key elements of ISO or the key components of ISO 14001, which includes planning, operation and control, emergency preparedness, monitoring, measurement and auditing, and the management review. So, that was the phase 3, and in phase 4 it was monitoring and control. So, phase 4 includes real time monitoring of all the components of environment, whether it is the air, water, soil quality, noise and all. Then regular environmental audits assessment, the KPIs, the key performance indicators, which should highlight the environmental performance of the company, and the record or the reporting in the form of document or reports to the internal and external stakeholders to like maintain or enhance the reputation and increase or build the trust amongst the stakeholders. So, these were the 4 phases distributed over the timeline of 18 months. And during these 4 phases, the 4 key environmental initiatives undertaken by Tata Steel revolved around carbon footprint reduction, waste heat recovery, water management and waste management. So, for carbon footprint reduction, it is not like they tried just one thing, like there were multiple factors which contributed to each of these initiatives. For example, energy efficiency was increased, fuel switching, like switching from fossil fuel based to renewable energy based fuels, or the poorer performing fuel to the cleaner and better performing fuel. For example, if you are using coal for burning, instead of coal if you use coke or pet coke, it is a more cleaner fuel. If you use natural gas, it is a further clean fuel, though it is a fossil fuel, and if you use renewable energy, it is also the alternative fuel or alternative source of energy. Then carbon capture technology will also, so all these factors contributed overall to reduce carbon footprint. Similarly, waste heat recovery, because there is a lot of heat coming out from different points in a steel plant. So, if that heat is used for some other purpose, that will help reduce CO2 emissions substantially. Water management, because steel plant the capacity is huge, it takes lot of land area. So, there is a possibility of doing rainwater harvesting, and whatever water is used for cooling can be easily recycled. If water is used for removing sludge or like particulates or dust, then it can be sent to the effluent treatment plant, and some water efficient technologies can be developed. So, all these factors collectively will contribute towards water management. And finally, the waste management. So, if there is a biodegradable waste, it can be converted to energy. If it is inorganic or like solid in nature, it can be easily recycled and reused, and circular economy principles were promoted to be applied so that waste management is efficiently carried out. So, with all this process, like what we saw the Tata Steel's journey, like where do they exist in the market, what do they do with respect to steel, and before implementing ISO 14001, what were the challenges related to compliance, environment and stakeholder concerns, and when they set out on a journey to implement ISO 14001, what was the approach they followed, what was the timeline, how they divided the timeline into different phases, the 4 phases. During those 4 phases, they carried out certain key initiatives and all the factors which contributed to each of those initiatives, and the outcome of entire exercise was all the 12 facilities of Tata Steel, they achieved ISO 14001 certification within the specified timeline. And though getting that certification is an achievement, there were several benefits. On environmental benefits, they achieved 30% reduction in carbon footprint, 40% reduction in fresh water consumption, 90%, 95% water recycling, and almost 85% waste recycling and reuse. So, those were the environmental benefits which lead to further like say reduction in operating cost and increase in profits for the company. And then business benefits, you can see here almost 120 crore annual savings were there just from efficiency improvement. 65 crore from waste management or monetization, 95% reduction in the violations of environmental compliance, because whenever the company used to violate environmental compliance, they used to pay a penalty and it used to be in the form of a monetary fine. So, in that there was almost 90% reduction. Enhanced access to environmentally conscious market, so that access opened, and improved sustainability ratings and brand reputation. So, if you go to the Tata Steel website today, you will see that under their logo it is written an ISO 14001 certified company. So, it helped them to improve their sustainability rating and the reputation of their brand. So, to summarize, in today's lecture, like while continuing with ISO 14001 series, today we saw different components of ISO 14001, the most widely used EMS and the clauses. How many clauses were there? 10 clauses, out of which first 3 were related to the guidelines or the background of the standard, and 4 to 10 were related to any management based activity, which includes all the components of ISO 14001. And then we looked at one case study of Tata Steel, one of the biggest, the second largest steel producer in India. They have 12 manufacturing facilities and each of those facilities are ISO 14001 certified now, and their journey, like what did they do over a period of 18 months, how different phases were carried out, how different initiatives were taken, and what were the benefits in terms of environment as well as business that we saw as a outcome. So, that completes the part of environmental management system as well as the unit of environmental management. In next lecture, we will start with environmental laws and acts. So, thank you.